A new year with old problems. The food crisis in East Africa affected more than 37 million people in 2017. Will 2018 be any better? As its caliphate collapses in the Middle East, is ISIS now eyeing Africa as the new frontier for terrorism? And coming to America, African immigrants tell us what shocked them most about American culture. Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome on this brand new year. I'm Vincent McCory and this is Africa 54. We begin this New Year's Day with an update of the severe drought and conflict in East Africa that left more than 37 million people severely food insecure in 2017, according to the United Nations World Food Programme. Emergency relief efforts helped much of the region avoid the worst, with the exception of South Sudan, where famine was declared in two regions in early 2017, and the humanitarian situation continues to get worse. VOA's Jill Craig reports from Nairobi.
2017 brought severe drought to much of East Africa. Somalia was particularly hard hit. Large numbers of livestock died and millions of people were displaced.
Somalia suffers from recurrent climatic shocks every year, but every few years it has a regional impact. It's much severe than previous years because of the loss of several consecutive rainy seasons.
And, says Jordi Reich of the International Red Cross, animals are everything to pastoralists. Recovery could take years.
And I think that even if the drought is over, and again, it's a bit too early to say that, but even if the drought is over, again, people, pastoralists, will not get the animals out of the blue, while farmers still have a chance to plant their fields again, hope for the rain, and grow food.
Elsewhere in the region, that is not the case. In South Sudan, war, not drought, is the cause of hunger. And the government has faced accusations that it has hindered aid.
Basically, what's happened now is that from October to December, we're in the harvest season, when the harvest should be coming in and food security should be at its best time in the year. But this year, for the first time, there are 25,000 people in South Sudan who are facing famine conditions in parts of South Sudan during the harvest. And last year, there were absolutely no one facing famine conditions during the harvest time.
In February, 2 areas of South Sudan were designated as famine-stricken, although later in the year, the classification was removed. However, the WFP says that the number of people at risk of starvation in South Sudan has doubled from last year.
The economy is in a meltdown. There is something like, for basic food, there are price rises of 250% in the last year. So the situation is becoming untenable for greater and greater numbers of people.
In August, the 1 millionth South Sudanese refugee crossed the border into northern Uganda. The rapid influx has strained the local food supply and left aid agencies scrambling.
I faced a lot of loss. I left everything there. Crops that I harvested are in the garden.
Exacerbating the effects of severe drought and rising food prices, the fall armyworm wreaked havoc on crops across the continent. In Kenya, the price of maize nearly doubled over the long-term average. And so people in East Africa are hoping that 2018 brings more consistent rains, good harvests, and peace. Jill Craig, VOA News, Nairobi.
Well, Kenya's month-long political roller coaster finally ended in November when President Uhuru Kenyatta was sworn in for his second term. Opposition leader Raila Odinga has threatened to hold his own inauguration, but got a stern warning from the government not to do so. Jill Craig recaps this historic year in Kenyan politics.
Please repeat after me. I,
Uhuru Kenyatta.
Those words from Kenya's President Uhuru Kenyatta in November concluded an unusually drawn-out 2017 election season. After the country's August polls, in which Kenyatta was declared the winner over Raila Odinga, the Supreme Court annulled the presidential election, citing irregularities in the transmission of election results.
The presidential election held on 8 August 2017 was not conducted in accordance with the Constitution and the applicable law, rendering the declared results invalid, null, and void.
So the court ordered the Electoral Commission, or IEBC, to hold a new poll within 60 days. After continued demands for IEBC reforms, Odinga decided to withdraw from the October 26th rerun election and urged his supporters to boycott the polls. Kenyatta was announced the winner of the second election. Odinga argued that Kenyatta lacked legitimacy given the low voter turnout. 2 petitions filed in the Supreme Court challenged the decision, but this time the court upheld the election results. Odinga responded by announcing the creation of a resistance movement and threatening to conduct his own inauguration. The Attorney General had this response.
The criminal law of the Republic of Kenya, in Article 40 of the Penal Code, provides or stipulates that that sort of process is high treason. It is high treason in respect of the person so involved and any other person facilitating that process.
Many fear the installation of Odinga as an alternative president could increase tension in a country where more than 70 people were killed during election-related violence. Kenyans now wait to see if their newly elected officials will use 2018 to promote peace and fulfill their campaign promises. Jill Craig, VOA News, Nairobi.
Well, in 2017, Somalia elected a new president as it battled severe drought and resurgent al-Shabaab. Now, in October, the worst terror attack in the country's history killed more than 500 people. Meanwhile, the U.S. military is ramping up its military operations as the African Union draws down its 10-year-old peacekeeping mission. Again, here's VOA's East Africa correspondent Jill Craig.
After months of political wrangling and questions of whether a fair election could be conducted, Somalia's parliament elected a new leader in February, Mohamed Abdullahi Mohamed, better known as Farmajo. Farmajo's win was influenced by Somalia's past 27 years of insecurity, according to former Puntland government official Ali Ahmed Fatah.
So people were looking for a fresh start, and I think Farmajo was seen as a honest politician, by most people, including the new parliamentarians that came in to town shortly before that election.
Many Somalis want to see changes before the next election, including the introduction of a one-person, one-vote system. In December, the country started registering and accrediting independent political parties, the first time in nearly 50 years. But insecurity remains a serious problem. In October, the worst terror attack in the country's history, blamed on the terrorist group al-Shabaab, killed more than 500 people at one of Mogadishu's busiest intersections. Meanwhile, U.S. military involvement in Somalia has increased. The U.S. said an airstrike on an al-Shabaab training camp in November killed more than 100 militants. The Independent Bureau of Investigative Journalism says the U.S. carried out at least 30 drone strikes this year in the country. But as the U.S. steps up its involvement in the region, the African Union is drawing down its forces. The first batch of 1,000 soldiers are to leave Somalia by the end of the year, though the AU says a total withdrawal will be dictated by conditions on the ground. Somalia says it plans to take over security responsibilities from the AU. A security force of 22,000 is to be created, and Turkey opened a new military base near Mogadishu in September to help train Somali forces. In the midst of these political and security challenges was the drought, which affected millions of Somalis as their animals died and they went hungry. But Fatah warns against giving up hope.
I think we are hopeful, and I think the international community is also hopeful about Somalia. And Somalis are indefatigable group. They are not easily discouraged.
Not discouraged, and hoping that 2018 will bring progress toward stability. Jill Craig, VOA News, Nairobi.
Well, terrorism is always a major concern for world leaders, and with Islamic State's self-declared caliphate almost completely retaken in Iraq and Syria, U.S. officials are concerned about where the group could try to create its next hub, and Africa may be a likely target. As VOA Pentagon correspondent Kalabab reports, the U.S. military is trying to prevent Islamic extremists from taking advantage of the African continent's vast and ungoverned spaces.
Poverty, political disillusionment, and masses of young, unemployed Muslims. Those are ideal conditions for Islamic extremism, and they are all found in Africa.
If we're trying to look in the future, it's actually happening now that Africa is going to be the spot. It's going to be the hot spot.
The entire African continent has less than half the number of American troops deployed in Afghanistan. But increases in terrorist activity are among the reasons why the American military presence has grown rapidly on the continent, from 3,200 military personnel in 2009 to about 6,500 today.
There is African concern that the U.S. approach is becoming rather more militarized or more concerned with military and security issues than had been the case in the past.
John Campbell, who served as ambassador to Nigeria under President George W. Bush, told VOA the main thrust of effort on the continent should be on what he calls the root causes of extremism, lack of economic development and poor governance. But this effort will likely prove more difficult if the State Department's budget is slashed by a third, as forecast in the administration's budget plan.
Is, in fact, a security approach going to work? And I would suggest that by and large, no.
U.S. Africa Command, which oversees military activities on the continent, aims to strengthen local African militaries to combat Islamic extremists.
Fire when ready!
Africa's growing young male population is ripe for recruitment. Africa Command's senior enlisted leader told VOA.
You have no options, and here comes an extremist that is offering you a motorbike and a bride. What do you think you're going to do? Your family's starving, you can't provide for them, and somebody's giving you an option.
The administration this year expanded the authority to strike al-Shabaab and Islamic State fighters in Somalia, allowing offensive strikes against the militants, rather than just strikes defending African allies and their American advisors.
It definitely helps, because we're doing our best to go ahead and employ our assets to help them out in any way we can.
But the war against extremism in Africa has not come without a cost. A U.S. Navy SEAL died aiding Somali security forces against al-Shabaab in May, and 4 American soldiers were killed in an October Islamic State ambush in Niger. If the security needs grow in coming months, more American troops could find themselves facing dangerous situations across the African continent. Carla Babb, VOA News, The Pentagon.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter, VOA Vince McCory. Still ahead on Africa 54, the sounds of Congo's Thabo Fataki. Stay with us. So, what makes a film fit for the holidays? Not so much a religious subject as an appeal to the whole family and audiences of all ages. This year, 3 high-budget films, Star Wars, The Last Jedi, the political thriller, The Post, and the musical, The Greatest Showman, fit the bill. VOA's Penelope Pulo has more.
Star Wars The Last Jedi, Episode 8, is a much-anticipated installment in the fight of the Resistance against the First Order. But even if Star Wars is not your religion, it is still a visually powerful sci-fi film with massive sets, complex characters, and an unpredictable story that centers on the battle of good versus evil.
The balance.
Daisy Ridley reprises the role of Rey, one of the key characters of the Resistance, who finds Luke Skywalker and uncovers the powers of the Jedi. Like Rey, Kylo Ren, the charismatic anti-hero is also facing inner conflict. Mark Hamill, who reprises the much-anticipated role of Luke Skywalker, was overwhelmed with the expanse of the production.
And I'm telling you, I'd never been on a set that opulent in my life. Plus 150 extras in exotic makeups and alien prosthetics.
It may not be an exaggeration to say that newcomer filmmaker Rian Johnson has created the most riveting yet Star Wars episode.
I hope audiences come out of the theater wanting to run into their backyard, grab their Star Wars toys, and start flying spaceships around. I hope it just feels like a great Star Wars movie, a fun Star Wars movie that takes you back to being 10 years old again.
This is a devastating security breach that was leaked out of the Pentagon.
From sci-fi, we turn to a real-life political story that rocked America in the 1970s.
If the government wins, the Washington Post will cease to exist.
The Post, a critically acclaimed docudrama by Steven Spielberg, tells the story of how the Washington Post took a great risk publishing excerpts of top-secret government documents describing the war in Vietnam as a lost cause and revealing that the U.S. government lied about the extent of its involvement in the war in Indochina.
The way they lied, those days have to be over.
And it showed that we were really fighting an illegal war and an unwinnable war.
Meryl Streep plays Washington Post publisher Katharine Graham, one of a handful of women in leadership positions back then, and Tom Hanks is the paper's impassioned executive editor, Ben Bradlee.
If you publish, we'll be at the Supreme Court next week.
Meaning?
Well, we could all go to prison.
This is a highly entertaining, tightly paced political drama that will appeal not only to fans of political thrillers, but also to many who may find the 1970s political scene in Washington eerily relevant to today.
What will happen if we don't publish? We will lose. The country will lose.
Ladies and gents, this is the moment you've waited for.
If you consider the musical film genre as the beating heart of the holidays, you are in for a treat. Hugh Jackman takes center stage as the greatest showman. The film, by Michael Gracie, is based on real-life entertainer P.T. Barnum, who founded the Barnum and Bailey Circus that he called the greatest show on earth. Hugh Jackman plays the legendary character as he rises from obscurity, gathers marginalized people with peculiar talents, and creates a spectacular variety troupe. The film, a great spectacle of its own this Yuletide season, delivers the message of acceptance for all those who, no matter how different or odd they may look, carry the spark of genius.
No one ever made a difference by being like everyone else.
Happy holidays. Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
Well, it's time now for a short break. When we come back, what do foreigners find so strange about American culture? We speak to a few African immigrants after the break. Many of us who immigrated to from Africa to the U.S. came with various expectations that are often far from reality. Africa 54's Esther Githuyu talks to colleagues here at the Voice of America and brings us this report.
I'm here at the Africa division of Voice of America to talk with some of my colleagues from the continent about their culture shock experiences when they first came to America.
I thought everything was like Hollywood. You get here, you can meet Will Smith on the road, you can speak to Beyonce. When you watch TV at home, everything looks like it's glitz and glamour. And then when you get here, people work hard. You know, it's not TV. That's what I discovered.
Omari Kaseko from Tanzania was awestruck by America's cleanliness.
I remember the first time I landed, and we were driving, and that was Dallas Airport, and we were driving to DC, and I couldn't believe how clean the city was. I can actually walk without shoes.
The first one was the smile, the fake smile. I'll meet someone and I'm like, hi. And then their lips are closed, immediate for a second. So I was like, what's going on? But I was still smiling for like 5 minutes. I had my smile on me. But for them, it was just for a second. They have just their teeth out. I was shocked. I was like, what's going on here?
Meet Sheikh Tiero, perhaps one of the tallest men in VOA.
What I expect from American was like, I would say black people was more related to me, but when I first came, those are the people that look down on me more, and people ask you questions, how do you guys do in Africa? They really literally think we don't go to school there, we live lions, I even make some people believe that I got pet lion in my house.
A month after Tigist Geme arrived from Ethiopia, she met a friend at a coffee shop, but did not expect to hear this.
One of the lady asked me where I'm from. So I told her I'm from Ethiopia. And she looked at me and my friend and she's like, wow, you have a good body weight to be from Ethiopia. And I guess she told everybody from Ethiopia I was malnourished and skinny and we didn't have enough food.
I have noticed that Americans really don't know anything about Africa. They thought Africa is like a giant country. I said, do you know that we have 54 countries like Africa 54 in Africa?
Growing up in Africa, it just gives you an over expectation of what it is, the life in America. The reality is that you have to get on that bus, that train, and you have to earn everything you get.
I was shocked when I say I'm from Guinea and people were like, oh, you from Papua New Guinea? I said, no. Are you from Guinea-Bissau? I said, no. Are you from Equatorial Guinea? I said, none of them. I'm from Guinea, and the city is Conakry. I said, oh, where is it? I have to explain myself. It's near Senegal, it's near Liberia, it's close to Sierra Leone or Ivory Coast.
The first night that I was invited for dinner, guess what? After meals, we were invited for some tea. And they told me, do you like hot tea or iced tea? I was like, wait a minute, iced tea? Really? Now, this was my first time to drive in snow. I have never driven before in the snow here. So I thought when snow is there, you drive normally and just hold on to your brakes. If you're going down, you just apply your brakes. So when I applied my brakes, Esther, what happened? You can't believe the car turned all over and faced where I was where I was coming from. It was an eye-opener to see so many things that are really different.
Esther Githuyu at VOA News, Washington.
Well, we end our show today with the music of Congolese artist Thabo Fataki. The song is Philosophie. From all of us here in Washington, have a good night and a great 2018.
Désolé mon frère, il n'y a qu'une seule philosophie, celle de Fataki. Thabo Fataki, de retour. Jibel Piana Salvatore de la patrie, papa chéri. Est-ce que vous avez
Talo ami, Jean-Claude Mavambo.
Bougez, bougez, bougez maman, bougez.
Freddy Kaboza.
Bougez maman, bougez. Ah, bougez les mots.
Un nightclub Cosmos, Dodo Wechi. Eric Kaboza, Quentin Samouraï. À l'Aristoclub, Coco Benga et Tanguy. Alain Prince Macaba, ordinateur 148 mémoires. Aline Osene. Claude Pires. Vicky Gonzalez, le vieux Kouti. Elodie Lipassa, Miss Bomolo, Lili Koboy. Zézé Zidane. Boris Bondo. Papa Vumbi. Marie-Claire Kande, bébé de Das. Leslie Moulumba. Denis Elungu. Salon Franck, le meilleur de Bruxelles. Salon Espace Ambiance. Didier Massela, le général Kwek Ngouakasi. Mais il y a eu un mot. Salon Barracuda. Nicole Mokonsi. Le bras Massela, Champs-Élysées. Gustave Massela. Didier Petit. Décosse Coco. Maître 150 le dinosaure. Maître Bass Bagi Bamba. Chicho Lembe. Didier Kiamata. Nazobenga Jean-Paul Bangala na Coco Bangala. Alpha Mbia. Jesse Diboko. Abou Kembe. Georges Mboukoua. Pati Omongo. Joka Kabengele. Théodore Ngema Obiang. Bobala Nkomi Maria José. Avatar. Maître Bourrois, 10 ans de pouvoir. Dadi Matundu. Paul Babati. Père double, le batteur congolais le plus stable. Igwe Yangiama de la forêt. Ambassadeur Kijabron. Chémi la maman exaucée.
Welcome to English in a Minute. Today's episode won't cost you anything.
Freebie.
Let's see what this one is about.
Anna, I love my job.
Oh, yeah? Why is that?
I get so many freebies from the bands I write about. CDs, t-shirts, water bottles, even tickets to see them perform.
Wow. The only freebie I ever got